Today we are going to talk about one of the real miracles that happens on Earth, and that is pregnancy and the development and the creation of a embryo into a fetus and eventually to a baby. And so I hope that all of you have the opportunity in some time of your day to experience this firsthand. And really, there's a lot of impacts that can happen. There's also some issues that can happen with getting pregnant and carrying to full term. So first of all, let's talk about, we don't necessarily need to spend a whole bunch on the act of how it happens, but fertilization, by definition, is when that sperm unites with the egg, and female releases typically one egg per cycle. The male semen is a combination of sperm, but also some other liquids to help protect the sperm as it's traveling up the vaginal canal and looking to fertilize. The first cell of an individual is called a zygote. So we get 23 chromosomes from our mom, 23 from our dad, and once that fertilization happens and that zygote is created, we will then create a whole bunch of cells that will eventually become a bunch of different kinds of tissues. But we basically start off as this big mass of cells, stem cells, that are capable of becoming a lot of different things. So an embryo is a stage to describe the very, very early stages of pregnancy. And that is where those cells really are capable of becoming those different tissues that I mentioned. So after the zygote, it becomes an embryo. After that, you're actually going to start to somewhat see the formation of like what could be a tiny, tiny little human. So we have kind of talked about how developmentally we start off as kind of like this mass of cells, kind of a circle of cells. Then we kind of look like a kidney bean. Then we kind of get some head shape to us, and then some appendages, and then we see how we get digits in like our hands. We start to see the formation of a head end. We start to see the formation of what would be like our feet. And so it's a real unique process that happens. And it's also very predictable. There's so much science that goes into this that we know what time frame to look at when the baby's sex can be determined. We know what is actually happening. There's different like pregnancy apps where you can say, oh, your baby is the size of a clementine. Your baby is the size of a pear today. And so it's very, very predictable. And the studies of this have really improved because it's such an important situation for people. And so eventually we're able to really start to see what a little baby human actually looks like. So first of all, conception to birth, pregnancy is about 266 days. And so 9-10 months is kind of a good ballpark. And that pregnancy can carry over term or under term. We've all heard of like preemie babies or have maybe heard of females getting induced. And it's broken down into 3 trimesters, three, and it really takes a look at the development of that baby. So really, the first trimester is a lot of just development, a lot of growth, but you're not necessarily seeing a lot of like basically human type creatures, or looking creature, I should say. The first 2 weeks, a lot of development, but then you also start to get the formation of the placenta. The second trimester is a lot of growth. Here we're actually starting to look like a human at this point. And then the third trimester is also, you're still growing, but you're really getting some of those fine-tuned things, like the digits. You're starting to develop memory. You're able to move and do some things more on your own, even though you're inside the mother. As you well know, there are a ton of hormones that regulate the birth of a child, from the creation of milk after birth to the oxytocin that stimulates birth and contractions, estrogens created from the ovaries, as we well know. And so sometimes if a female is having troubles with either getting pregnant or maintaining pregnancy, sometimes there will be some hormone regulation that takes place. So again, that mass of cells, sometimes called the embryo or blastocyst, is just capable essentially of becoming any type of cells. They're what we call totipotent, where they can become many, many varieties of things. And so this just kind of gets a little bit fancier than what we want, but just understanding what they can lead to with those different layers of tissues. Something that's kind of unique is that we are a placental animal. And so I asked this question, if I ask this question, if I have a chicken egg, what becomes the chick? The yolk or the white part? The answer is the white part. The yolk is actually a nutrient pack. So when we talk about us as humans, what is our yolk? Our yolk is actually the placenta. So the placenta is a nutrient pack. It's got a ton of blood vessels, it's got a ton of things in it. And it's also connected via the umbilical cord to the actual baby. So that's how our baby is fed. That's where it gets its food. That's also where the waste goes. And so that is created inside of the female, obviously. The uterus is where the egg will be fertilized. It's where that basically the rest of pregnancy will take place is inside the uterus. So, what does the placenta do? It basically is the lifeline. It is going to deliver hormones, it is going to deliver food, but also get rid of stuff that is not needed. And so it's super, super important that we have that. And like I said, it's the equivalent of yolk in an egg. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about developmentally. We all care about whether we're going to be a boy or a girl, but we all start off the same. And there's a reason why we don't usually check for sex until usually after about 16 weeks. That's like the earliest. They typically like to do it at 20 just so they don't make any mistakes. And so here what we're looking at is we're actually looking at the opening of both the would be like the sexual organs, but also the anus that we're seeing. And so, believe it or not, we look the same and develop the same for about the first 12, 14 weeks before eventually the male develops a penis and the female develops a vagina. So, what's unique is that the head of the penis is the equivalent of the clitoris in the female. And so, that's where a lot of our sensation comes from for both sexes. And how the reason for that is because essentially we're developing the same in the first 0 to 12, 0 to 14 or so weeks. So the effects of pregnancy on the mother. So if you're a female, what's going to happen? First of all, you got to get your uterus larger. And so that is going to obviously allow for some growth to take place with the baby itself, but also that can have an influence on your bladder, of course, and that's why sometimes pregnant females will have to urinate much more often. And it will also going to change a little bit of, like, you've heard of the widening of the hips, as well as changing the spine to make room for that actual baby. And you also can have a variety of side effects because let's be honest, you have another human growing inside of you. There's a whole bunch of wives' tales like, oh, if you have heartburn, that means that the baby's going to have hair. If you have morning sickness, it's going to be this sex. But realistically, it changes from female to female. It changes from pregnancy to pregnancy. So even moms who have had 4 children and they think, oh, it's going to be a boy, I know for sure, they can be wrong just because every pregnancy is a little bit different. So when we talk about the actual labor or what we call the parturition, there's 3 stages. The first is the cervix will start to thin and it will start to expand. Second stage is actually starting to remove the child. And then the third stage is delivering the placenta. So, oftentimes we're so excited to see the baby, but there's another delivery that happens, and that's the delivery of the placenta as well. So, kind of unique that that all happens. Um, I want to talk about this just because, I hope that you guys don't have too many issues with this, but infertility is something that impacts many, many couples. It's kind of a subject that is very private and oftentimes not talked about. But a lot of couples do have issues with infertility. Couples that maybe where the female isn't able to carry, maybe the male isn't able to produce sperm within the semen, maybe just a combination of things. And so thankfully, there's a lot of treatments that can happen in order for you to bear a child, or even not necessarily bear a child, but you also have to understand that there's adoptions that are available. So even if physiologically you're not able to be a parent, understand that you certainly can still be a parent to someone. So infertility treatment is very, very common. I just want to highlight that there are a lot of treatments out there. Sometimes it takes a lot of time, but it's an important issue. All right, so males, we know that we're pretty easy. We have a lot of androgen, and we have some testosterone that helps regulate us, produce sperm, that sort of thing. A lot of that, as we talked about, the endocrine system originates in the brain. That can change depending on a variety of different things. Females, as you all know, have a certain cycle. You have 5 different hormones that are influencing your cycle and your maturation throughout time. And many of those also deal with the menstrual cycle and when you are most fertile. So, your most fertile females basically between, let's say your period is day 0, you are most fertile from days 13 to 15. After that, certainly you can still get pregnant, but the odds, the percentages are much, much lower. So you've heard of maybe practicing, safe sex or having sex during certain times. There's also what's called like, family planning and that sort of thing. And you can do a lot of research on that. But we just understand that females, there's certainly a prime for getting pregnant, and that is kind of that 13 to 15, 16-day mark. And obviously that depends on the female as well. And all of that, of course, is regulated thanks to your hormones that are influencing that menstrual cycle. That also can be changed if you are on something like birth control, or if you are taking some other medicine, or you're doing something else to prevent pregnancy. But those are natural cycles that happen with females, typically about 28 days. And we also understand that those same hormones are what got you mature in the first place. So you have breast development, widening of hips, hair growth, that sort of thing was also influenced by your hormones. And then when you stop with a lot of those hormones, that's what we call menopause. So essentially, that is when females are no longer viable and no longer able to create children. And same thing goes with males, is that testosterone becomes less and less created as you age, because we all know that there's a prime for males and females to create children, but we also know that there's some exceptions to those rules as well. So that just kind of gives us a little bit of the ovarian cycle, but also understanding that that deals with ovulation. That's the day that you're most primed to get pregnant, and accepting of sperm or semen. And so that's our short little discovery on pregnancy and development.